Okay, I gave you a lot of different names for the law, and many of them make reference to Moses being the author of the law. And so we talked about the law of Moses, the book of Moses, the book of the law of Moses, and so on. Clearly, Moses is attributed as the author, and just wait. I have a whole section here to show you on why Moses is and should be recognized as the author of the Pentateuch. So if you'll help me stay awake. No, I mean you stay awake and help me stay awake. No, I'm kidding. We'll get through this. Some of it can drag a little bit, but I'll try to interject here and there. 5 divisions of the Pentateuch. Penta, 5, Tuch, the scrolls or the volumes, 5 volumes, and the Jews, of course, see all of it as one. And then I got right to the point yesterday where I said I was going to give you some things about the impact of the Pentateuch on the rest of the Bible. And so we're going to look at the Old Testament, some of the things that the Pentateuch, how that has impacted the rest of the Old Testament. And I'm going to just basically make a statement with each of these sections of the Old Testament, and then we'll look at a couple of things throughout. First of all, we see that the Pentateuch had a great impact on the historical books. On the historical books. What are the historical books of the Old Testament? Where does it start? Joshua, and it goes through. Keep going. There's more events after the Kings and Chronicles. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Okay? So, think about those historical books. Did they make reference back to the Pentateuch? Of course. Book of Joshua, often. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth. We mentioned that yesterday. You get on into the kings, and certain of the kings, like Josiah, we mentioned, went back to the law. They found the law, and it changed his life, changed the kingdom. You've got Ezra reading. We looked at it yesterday. Ezra reading the law. Nehemiah reading the law. So in the historical books, they were constantly making reference back to the books of Moses, the Pentateuch. Secondly, they also made a great impact on the prophetic books. Of course, the prophetic books. The prophets using the law in their preaching to bring conviction. Especially Isaiah and Jeremiah. They kept bringing the people back to the law. Also, the poetic books. The poetic books. They were constantly making reference back to the books of Moses. In fact, of course, the poetic books are Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Even Song of Solomon is typically looked at as poetic. But in the Psalms especially, there are Psalms of Moses. Which one? Becca, you should know this. Because you and Trevor should know this. Because I preached on it several times in the ensemble. Which psalm? The Psalm of Moses. Oh, wow. Which psalm was written by Moses? Name one of them at least. There's several. It's a famous one for our college. 90. Psalm 90, verse 12. Teach us to number our days. Okay? Psalm 90 is written by Moses. And that's just one of the many things. Think about Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. I know the book of Joshua is a historical book. But Joshua 1:8 says, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein. Let me ask you this. What's a great way to meditate on something? Yes? Make it into a song. Okay, he knows where I'm headed with this. Or a what? A poem, right? Man, my kids, I don't know where they get all these poems at. Man, they read these things in school and they come home chanting these poems. What does that do? That helps you remember something. Especially, now as they're getting in Edmund's in first grade, so he's starting to learn some songs or poems about a number of different things, like the capitals of the states and things like that. Of course, when they're little, they learn the alphabet song. All of those are designed to help a person meditate. The book of Psalms is a book of songs that makes many references back to the Pentateuch to help people remember what God had done for them. How often do the Psalms, I just thought of this, how often do the Psalms mention the Exodus? I forget which chapter it is in the book of Psalms. For his mercy endureth forever. And then they'll say something else that God did for them, bringing them across the Red Sea, and step by step. And it always says, for his mercy endureth forever. What is that? It's helping them meditate, and they constantly kept going back to the Pentateuch. So in the poetic books, they meditated. That word meditate has to do with memorizing and learning through psalms or through poems. So the Pentateuch had a great impact on the poetic books. They used it on a regular basis. We also see that the Pentateuch had a big impact on the New Testament. On the New Testament. Let me just, a couple areas. Jews, of course, were very interested in the law at the time of Christ. So he used the law as examples in his teaching. What books in the Old Testament did Jesus quote from? What book did Jesus quote from more than any other? Yes? Isaiah's first. Anybody know what second is?
Genesis?
No. He used a lot more stories out of Genesis, but he actually quoted. I'll give you a hint. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Psalms. Book of Psalms is second. Third. Now you got 1 and 5. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy. It's Deuteronomy. What did Jesus tell the devil when the devil tempted him? He said, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. That comes from Deuteronomy. He also said, every word, how does that go? Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. That comes from the book of Deuteronomy. He quoted the book of Deuteronomy, third most of any of the Old Testament books. Jesus quoted the Pentateuch, of course, to Satan when he was tempted. You talk about, they loved the law. They highly respected the law. And of course Jesus did, because he's the Son of God, and it's his word. But you know, when I have memorized a lot of Bible, and I used to a lot more than I do now as far as when I was a teenager, I almost always memorize in the New Testament, right? And you probably do the same thing. You know, we memorize our doctrine verses from the New Testament. Well, to the Old Testament people, and even in the days of Christ, the New Testament wasn't written yet, they memorized from the Pentateuch to give them, you know, what do you call that? To give them ammunition against the devil. Okay, so as we memorize from the New Testament, they memorize from the Pentateuch. And Jesus quotes the Pentateuch back at the devil in his temptation. Okay, so the quotations from the Pentateuch, those were impacting the New Testament. Also the typology that went from the Pentateuch to the New Testament. Just mention some of these. Abraham, type of Christ. Melchizedek, a type of Christ. Hagar and Sarah. What's that a picture of in the New Testament? Hagar and Sarah.
Children of Israel and children of the Gentiles.
Okay, something like that. Anybody remember where it's found at? What book? In the New Testament? I think it's... I don't think so. I think it's Galatians, where Paul talks about the children of the bondwoman being cast out, and so on. He's making a reference to the law. It's a typology. Drinking from the rock, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. The brazen serpent, John chapter 3, verse 14. Christ's death and the high priest, Christ's death is all over Isaiah and Psalms. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The worm, the drinking the gall and the bitter on the cross. And then the high priest, the better covenant, book of Hebrews. Okay, so the mentions back to the Pentateuch from the New Testament, obviously very, very many of them. It definitely impacted the New Testament era very much. There's, just like we go through times where things are stressed more than others, and our country has interest in, and even Christianity, we have interest in things more than other times. The Jews are also that way. And as I've read about this, it's believed that at the time of Christ, the Jews themselves placed a very high importance on the law, but not really, the obedience to the law as much as the academics of the law. In other words, some of the greatest teachers of the law lived in the first century A.D. Hillel, Gamaliel, and others like that. Paul even. That's why there's such a strong influence on the Pharisee, the group of the Pharisees at that time, that they knew the law inside and out, and Jesus rebuked them for keeping the law but not doing the other things that were also important. So for some reason, I haven't studied out exactly why that was, but at that time period, the law was held in very high regard. And so it's not an accident. It makes sense that Jesus quoted the law on a regular basis in his teaching. That's the point I wanted to make. Okay, let's move on. Some of the theology found in the Pentateuch. Some of the theology. Hey, if the law is a very useful tool, and even though I know, and I'm just being honest with you, I know that I don't use the law or the books of the law very much in my daily life. I don't think about it very much. I mean, I know I do in the back of my, I understand creation, certain things like that. But I don't think about the book of Exodus and Leviticus very often. Okay? It's not there at the forefront of my mind. Whereas it was with the Jews. And so you say, well, how, we might sit here and say, well, what is there to learn in there besides, wave this offering? No, there's a lot of theology found in the Pentateuch that the children of Israel and the Jews would have adhered to and would have seen and recognized readily. Some of the theology found in the Pentateuch, I've just got a quick list I'll run through. God is the creator. God is the creator of all things. They saw that God, not just that in the fact that he did it, but in his name. Elohim, the all-powerful, the almighty one. God is the creator. They saw God as the redeemer. Genesis chapter 3, I'm going to send my son. He didn't say those words, but I'm going to send the seed to defeat the devil. What's that seed going to do? He's going to redeem. They saw God as holy. God is holy. That's found all through the Pentateuch. What? God is not someone to be treated lightly. God is not like man. He's holy. God, they saw him also as love. The same God in the same story who told Abraham to go sacrifice his son, the son whom he loved, said, hey, don't kill him. Sacrifice the sheep instead. I guarantee you, Abraham felt closer to God at that point, I would think, than any other time in his life where he knew that God was right there with him. He saw the love of God. So we see God in the Pentateuch. We also see man in the Pentateuch. We see man in the image of God. We see man in the fall, man in his sinfulness. So we see man in God's image. We see man in the fall. We see man in his sinfulness. And even in that sinfulness, we see a forgiving God and a loving God. Who's in systematic theology? Right? So I'm kind of looking at some of the main doctrines. God and man How about salvation? Do you see salvation in the Pentateuch? Surely you don't think of the Pentateuch as just a big works-oriented book. Works. Do this, do that. I mean, that's true, but you also can see salvation in it. God made a way for man to come back to God, to be reconciled back to God through the sacrificial system and other things. Salvation. You see Jesus Christ, the seed. You see Christ, the seed. Bless you. All right, let me mention some things about faith. You see, faith. Oh, man. The faith that these people had. You say, well, I thought the book of the law was about works. Oh, not even close. Go to the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Faith. Hopefully you're thinking where I'm going with this. You see Abel in verse number 4. You see Enoch in verse 5. You see Noah in verse 7. And Abraham in verse 8. Sarah in verse 11. Verse 13. These all died in faith. Goes on to Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses. Okay, what do we know about all those people? They all lived in the books of the Pentateuch early on, even before the law. But what do we know? That all of these people that Moses tells us about in the Pentateuch lived by faith. Not by works, not by, just trying to keep a certain set of rules. These all lived in faith. And so even the book of the law shows these people, their faith in God. Which, by the way, of course, the book of James and maybe in the book of Hebrews, but especially the book of James, seems to say to some people, some theologians, that salvation is by works. And so for that reason, Martin Luther himself rejected the book of James because it teaches works salvation. Well, I'm glad he saw that salvation is by faith, and I'm glad he saw that it's by faith even in the times of the Pentateuch. But he's wrong. The book of James doesn't teach that at all. It just teaches that faith is always accompanied by works. So, all right. See faith in many things here in Hebrews chapter 11 from those people who lived early in the book of Genesis. All right. The atonement is seen throughout the Pentateuch. The atonement and the sacrifices, the atonement in the tabernacle that was made with the sheep, or even the goats is involved in that atonement. How about the covenants? There are covenants as theology in the Pentateuch. What are some of the covenants? Yes?
Abraham.
The Abrahamic covenant. What's another covenant?
Davidic.
Not yet. Not in the Pentateuch.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Sorry.
Anybody else?
The Adamic covenant.
The Adamic covenant found earlier on, which you could, whatever that involves. I think it involves the sacrifices and so on, even though there's not much information about it there. The Adamic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. How about, I know you're thinking probably something along the law. What, yes?
Does it count as a covenant? God's promise to Noah.
The Noahic covenant,
Yeah.
I've heard that before, absolutely. And then I don't know how to say it, but the Sinai covenant, the Sinaitic. I don't know how to say that. Yes? Yes, you may. So these are all covenants found in the Pentateuch, and I think it's just very interesting that from the earliest of times, God is seen making covenants with his people. He loved to do that. Anyway, so it shows things about the nature of God there in those covenants. All right, next. Let me mention quickly some of the oracles found in the covenant, in the Pentateuch. Oracles. Wow, what a big word, right? What does the word oracles mean? Anybody know? Yes?
Teachings?
Close. You're on the right track.
They're, you could call them diviners, or the seers, the people that God revealed things to.
Yep, you're definitely on the right track.
The teachers, the preachers.
So the seers are bringing the words of God. The word oracle literally is very similar to our word for inspiration. So it's literally talking about the breath of God or the words of God. Okay? So these are oracles or the words of God that were given to different individuals throughout the Pentateuch. Let me just mention some of these. In the book of Genesis, Isaac gave blessings to his sons. That could be looked at as an oracle. It was prophetic. Who else gave blessings and future events to their son, to his sons? Jacob, Genesis chapter 49, and those were prophetic. Jacob will be, and so they go through all of the sons, and they're prophetic. Those are oracles of God. Somebody else? Yes?
Moses.
Several times you could definitely see Moses with the giving of the law. Those are definitely oracles of God. Yes?
Could you consider Moses' father-in-law? Priest?
What did he do?
Priest.
Jethro.
He gave him some instructions, some godly instructions.
Yeah, I don't remember if those were considered oracles.
He told him how to set up the government system.
Yes.
For people of Israel, like the.
But I don't know if those were oracles or if it was just wisdom, Okay, I'm missing the word here. I can't find where it is. In the New Testament, in the book of 1st or 2nd Peter, where it talks about the oracles of God.
Oh, yeah, our commitment.
I think it's in 1st or 2nd Peter. Anyway. Okay. Well, anyway, but Moses several times, maybe not, I'm getting chalk everywhere, maybe not the, times where he's just talking to the people, but definitely when the law was given to Moses, that was considered the oracles of God. And the New Testament, and I think it's 1st or 2nd Peter, makes reference to the oracles of God, that breath, God-breathed words that were given to people, and it's referring back to the Pentateuch. So, okay. I'm almost done with my short little sections here, just different odds and ends things about the Pentateuch. Let me give you some of the names of God found in the Pentateuch. Some of the names of God found in the Pentateuch. Elohim, first of all, we see the all-powerful name of God. Elohim. Of course, we know Jehovah, which some say shouldn't be pronounced that way. It should be said Yahweh, Jehovah. Of course, this is the personal name of God. Of course, Adonai. Adonai is found a few times. Whoops. Also has something to do with, I believe, almighty or all-powerful, something like that. In Genesis chapter 14, God is called the God Most High, or the Most High God. Genesis 14:18. This is the story of Abraham going after Lot. Let me see here. And then coming back, I believe this is in the story of Melchizedek. Genesis 14. Yes. Verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem, he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God. Verse 22, And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Okay, so he's called the Most High God. Also in Genesis 21:33, he's called the Eternal God. The Eternal God. (21:33) says, Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting. Sorry, not eternal God, the everlasting God. Okay, any questions on those? What about all the names for different places, altars that were built? Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah Jireh. What are some of the others? I can't remember. Shalom? I think so. Anyway, Pastor Dammer preached on those, a year or so ago. But let me change this here. Everlasting. So obviously those are related to the name Jehovah. All right, one more little section on this. I want to point out how significant Moses as a person was. Moses, how significant he was. And we won't take long, but I do want to look at a few passages. I want you to see that God looked at Moses differently than all the rest of the Jews, and all the rest of the children of Israel. The name Jews is much later on. There were people in the Old Testament who had a very important position. I think of Samuel. We have often seen Samuel as, or I have at least, I'm sure you have, some of you have, as a prophet, a priest, and a judge. Okay? Moses definitely fits a couple of those categories. The Bible calls him a prophet. He definitely fulfilled the role of a priest. What's the role of a priest? Interceding between God and man, a mediator, if you will, interceding. He definitely did that a few times. And he wasn't a king, but he definitely led in the role of a king. So he had a very important position. Samuel was a prophet, priest, and a judge. There are other people, of course, there were many kings in the Old Testament. But Moses, I think, held this position in a very, very important time. God, of course, spoke directly to Moses. Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12, the Bible says in verse number 6. Actually, even back before that. Miriam and Aaron, his brother and his sister, spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. Glad we know that. Twice it tells us that. And they said, Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by his brother and his sister? And the Lord heard it. Now, in parentheses. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Into parentheses. All right. Let me just throw it out there, see what you think. You think Moses wrote that? It's in parentheses. You think Moses wrote that? Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Is it wrong, or is it taking anything away from the writings of Moses to say that somebody added that later on. Somebody edited that into the text. What do you think? Is it wrong? Does that make it not the book of Moses anymore? Yes? What do you think?
It doesn't, but it opens the door for more dangerous things. So,
Sure.
okay, if somebody added that, what else did they add?
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say it's slippery slope.
A slippery slope. I don't know if I disagree totally with that. I do believe, this is my personal opinion, I do believe that there are several edited notes in the Pentateuch. I really believe that. I think that's one of them. I believe the end of Deuteronomy is another one where it tells about the death of Moses. And I personally believe that there's some other times in the book of Genesis where it gives an older name of a place, or it gives a name of a place like Hebron, and then it says, which was, in parentheses, it says, which was before time, Kirjath Arba. So somebody, I think, probably came in and said, okay, where in the world is that place? I'm going to make this note so that people see that it used to be named a different place. Does it open the door? I don't know. Do you know you don't have a King James 1611? You have like a King James 1627 or something like that. And maybe not even that. Some of those have been edited now to where, the 1970 something, where some of the words have been changed, not changed, but spelled differently now. Yes?
And isn't it possible that somebody else that was writing another book under inspiration
as well
was reading through the Pentateuch and under inspiration wrote in certain things?
I don't know. I just don't see it as that much of a slippery slope, I guess, myself. To say, obviously, and it's even in parentheses, as if somebody added that and made it obvious that this is this was added, like notes. So, yes?
I'm just thinking, like, you could just be like, someone is, they're relating the story, and the guy who's writing it is just like, yeah, and Moses was meek, So let's kind of give us a context towards that we wouldn't get otherwise.
Sure. So wherever it came from, I don't know. I have a hard time seeing that it came from Moses. I guess God could have said, Moses, I don't care what you say, write it. Put it down. And so that's possible. But I don't personally think that it takes away from the integrity of the books of Moses that somebody added a few notes and under inspiration. So, everybody knows what I mean by the end of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, the last verses, 10 or so verses, talk about the death of Moses. Now, Moses could have written about his own death, but it could also have been added in there by Joshua right after it happened. And he, instead of putting it in the beginning of Joshua, he adds it, he finishes off the book of Moses, which, by the way, is not an unusual practice in history for the next writer to come along and to transition from the end of one book to the beginning of the next book. So, anyway, those are some possibilities. And I personally don't see that it takes away from the integrity. It's still the books of Moses. Okay. Well, anyway, so God, I didn't finish this. So God speaks directly to Moses. Verse 4, the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, unto Aaron, unto Miriam. So they were challenging. Now, the real issue here is not that Moses had married an Ethiopian woman. That's not the real reason why they're arguing against Moses. The real reason is that they felt like Moses was stealing all of their authority, or hoarding all of the authority to himself. Hath the Lord not spoken also by us? And so the Lord comes out and says, you three, come here. Back to the woodshed. Come out, ye three, unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out, and the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so. I don't speak to him in a vision and in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all my house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, even through appearance, even apparently, and not in dark speeches, not in visions. Will make myself known, I went back. And not in dark speeches, and the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses, your brother? Oh, man. How about your sister and your brother want to argue with you and you say, shut up. No, God, in this case, of course, it's a lot different than that, but God took it very serious. You're going to speak against the man that I speak, not in dark speeches or visions or dreams. I speak face to face. So this is the kind of person that Moses is. And through this, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little flippant here, but I think Moses is the greatest Christian in the Bible. He's the greatest Christian in the Bible. Obviously, he wrote more of Scripture than anyone else. Paul's second, and Paul is the New Testament Moses. Okay? The greatest Christian in the Bible, God spoke to Moses like he did to no one else. Moses interceded for the people, and numerous times God says this about Moses, that he was faithful in all his house. It says it here in Numbers chapter 3. My servant Moses is not so, like a prophet only, who is faithful in all mine house. Back in Hebrews then. Hebrews chapter 11. I'm sorry, not Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 3. Verse number 1. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus, who is faithful to him that appointed him, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. Wow. Okay. When God is talking about Jesus Christ and how faithful he is, he uses the example of Moses. That's an honor. It's not the other way around. Moses is so faithful that he's like Jesus Christ. Now, it's not, that would be an honor, but this is even more of an honor. When God says, hey, Jesus was always faithful, just like Moses. Wow. Think about that. Next verse again. Here's, as also Moses was faithful in all his house, for this man was counted worthy of more glory. Okay, now he puts it in perspective. He's greater than Moses. But still, for Jesus to be compared to Moses, my goodness, what an honor. Inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. Right? Jesus, the builder of the house, hath more honor than Moses. For every house is built by some man, but he that built all things is God. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house, as a servant for a testimony of those things which are spoken after. Oh, let's see. I think there's one more. Anyway. So you see that the faithfulness of Moses is highlighted several times there. So, he's a great man. I believe greatest Christian of the Old Testament for sure, probably of all time. Closer to God than anyone else. Okay, any questions or comments on that? Significance of Moses. Okay, I've said it since, and I'm getting blue in the face, but Moses is the author. But I want to prove it to you, okay? You needed that, right? So let's take this horse out and just give him a royal beating, right? We're going to beat him. We're going to beat this horse till he's dead, and then we're going to keep on beating him. So the authorship of the Pentateuch. I want to make a case, and you'll be required to know this. I want to make a case for Mosaic authorship. A case for Mosaic authorship. I just thought of this. If somebody in Cambodia said, a horse, they're going to take a horse out and they're going to beat him. Oh, what's that got to do with teaching from the Bible, you know? That's one of our English sayings. So this is, we're going to look at some reasons why we believe in Mosaic authorship. All right. After this, which we won't get to it today, but after this we're going to look at why others don't believe in the Mosaic authorship and some of the arguments that they make. You say, well, why are we... I think it's good for us in this point in the study of the Pentateuch to know this. So let me give you some of the reasons why we believe, I believe, in Mosaic authorship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main reasons. First of all, the Mosaic origin of the Pentateuch is established by voices from Jewish and Christian tradition. Say, well, that's... So certain people believe in it, and that's why you believe it? Okay, that's one of the 5 reasons. Let me say that again. Yes. Mosaic origin of the Pentateuch has been established by voices from Jewish and Christian tradition. Say, well, okay, so you believe it because they believe it. Right. I believe that because real Bible scholars, there's a lot of scholars who were not Bible scholars who came out in critical texts against the Mosaic authorship. But real Bible scholars believe it. Godly Christians believe it. Jews, who maybe you could argue that they have ulterior motives, but Jews even believe, that they should know. They're the ones, according to Romans chapter 10, I believe it is, they're the ones who should know, Romans chapter 2, they've been put in charge of the Scriptures. They've been put in charge of the books of Moses. And they say Moses wrote it. So when you ask the real experts, the ones who are really into the Pentateuch, they believe that Moses wrote it. I know that's kind of a cheap argument maybe in your mind, but their unanimous testimony is supported by many other things. And so these other 4 points are the reasons why they believe it, and that's also why I believe it. Okay? Moses did keep a written record of important transactions relative to the Israelites, and he talked about it in relating a victory over the Amalekites, in which he was commanded by divine authority to record. The language said, write this for a memorial in a book. I'll come to these, so you don't have to write too fast. Shows that this narrative was to form part of a register, a record already in progress. Various circumstances combine to prove that this register was a continuous history of the special goodness and care of divine providence in the choice, protection, and guidance of the Hebrew nation. Okay, so the books of Moses were being added to by Moses as they were going through these events. And several times God actually said, write this down. And God said, write this down. And so I wrote it. And so he gives record of that. So the second reason I believe that Moses was the author, not only because true Bible scholars, Jewish and Christian, believe in it, but secondly now, Moses himself says that he wrote these things down. Moses gave his own experiences. Okay, so this isn't just the Bible saying, oh yeah, Moses was told to write this down. No, Moses says, God told me to write it down. And then he even writes it. God told me to write this down. Go to the book of Exodus. By the way, you might say, well, that's not really proof. I could say, God told me to write this down. You realize even in a court of law, even in our society still today, if you write something down in English, in our English background, that carries weight. I remember years ago we had something happen on our bus, and we wrote down the details of what happened. And I remember thinking, yeah, but I could write this down if I needed to. I could write it down a year from now. Oh no, it doesn't carry the same weight. When you write it down right then, it's fresh, and you know what you went through and the experience that it was and so on. So you write down those details right when it happens. Anyway, and when Moses says, God told me to write it down, he records all of that. That carries weight. Let's go to a couple of passages. Exodus chapter 24. Exodus 24, verse 4. Well, back up to verse 3. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. Yeah, okay. For about 150 years, we've had, great scholars who said that there was no writing at the time of Moses. So Moses was a liar here. He's a liar. The Bible says he wrote all the words. Oh, but there wasn't writing. Yes, there was writing. And now that's become a joke because everybody knows now that there was writing at this time. And the Bible isn't the only evidence anymore. There's all of these other evidences now that they didn't just write special documents. They wrote about everything, just like we do. They wrote love letters, They wrote about everything. Writing was common. It wasn't just for the elite in society. It was common. But anyway, so Moses wrote all the words. Why did Moses write the words? It's a dumb question, but yes. That's one reason. Why did Moses write the words? Because God said, write them down. What's another reason he wrote down the words? This is too simple. You're missing it. Yes?
As a record that the people said we're going to do this.
Okay, very true. Go more basic. Why do we write things down?
So he wouldn't forget it.
So he wouldn't forget? Go more basic.
He's 80-something years old.
Yeah, that's true. He was very old. His writing was, Why do people write? No, go basic. So we can read it. Thank you. So we can read it. What's my point? Think about it. This is a very important point.
He wanted others to read it. He wanted the people of Israel to read it.
They could read. They could read. Isn't that, it's as basic as it gets. Why did Moses write it down? So that the people could read it in the future. So not only could the elite of society, like Moses, write, but the common people could read it. Okay, that's very important to understand. This is not an illiterate society we're dealing with here. These people were educated enough to read. That brings up a lot of questions to me. Where did they learn to read? Egypt. When Moses is writing this, they had just left Egypt. They had learned to read in Egypt. But they probably hadn't just gone, they were slaves. They didn't go to Egyptian schools. They would have been taught to read at home. Okay, the Jews put a high importance on education and especially being able to read Scripture. The Scripture is the center of their life. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Put on the posts of your doors. Everywhere. The Scripture was supposed to put it right there on your forehead. So what's the point? They could read. It was common for everybody to be able to read. This is not an uneducated caveman society here. All right, so Exodus 24. Moses wrote all the words of the Lord and rose up early in the morning and built an altar. Keep going. He sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins and so on, sprinkled on the altar. Number 7. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has said will we do and be obedient. I believe he read the entire thing that was available at that point. He read it to them. What was available at this point? At least Genesis and up to this point in Exodus. So, but the point I'm making is that this seems to have been a book that he's adding to a register. So, actually, that's not my point yet. I will get to that. But I'm making the point here that there are repeated times in Moses' writings where he said, God said, write it down. And so I did, and I read it to the people. God told me again to write this down. I did, and I read it to the people. So there's this continuing addition to the records that Moses is making as time goes along. Go to 10 chapters later, Exodus 34. Exodus 34 now. Here they're at Mount Sinai, verse 29, Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony. This is the second time he's coming down from Sinai. This is not the ones where he broke them when he comes down at the worship of the golden calf. Anyway, but his face is shining. They were afraid to come nigh him. Verse 32, and after all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. Wow, what a visit this must have been. Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out, and he came out speaking to the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone on Moses, but the veil, so and so on. I'm sorry. I went past where I was supposed to go. Look at verse 27. The Lord said to Moses, write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. So Moses is seen here being commanded to write. He wrote it. He comes down the mountain and he tells all of the elders, at least, all the children of Israel, the rulers of the congregation, he tells the rulers of the congregation all that God had said. He's reading to them what God said. All right, so there are repeated assertions of Moses himself that the events of their experience were written down as they occurred. Go to Numbers chapter 33. Numbers chapter 33. Here we see this again. Another instance of Moses writing. Look at verse number 2. Verse 1. These are the journeys of the children of Israel which went forth out of the land of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. Girls, what do you call that? Huh? I said girls, but...
Wait, what was the question?
Moses wrote the goings out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. A journal, their journeys. It's literally where it comes from. You're keeping track of your journeys, your journal. And these are their journeys according to their goings out. And they departed from Ramses in the first... You see what this is? God said, Moses, write down a diary, a journal of what's happened day by day. And this is the diary. Then verse 3 starts the diary. And they departed from Ramses in the first month. That's from Egypt. And it goes, just starts reading along like a diary, like a journal. So what do we see here? Moses writing, or Moses recording that God said, write this down. And Moses wrote it down. And then we have that. Any of you keep a journal? Girls? No? My mom, I think it's an old timer thing or something. My mom has kept a diary for 40 years. She is
I
everything.
used to.
Maybe more, maybe 50 years. It's a long time.
I used to, but I went back and read it. It was really stupid. So I stopped.
But that's fine. See, you can't really do that. You got to wait 20 years, then go back and say, wow, that was dumb. But at least you kept on doing it. So, okay. All right, Moses said that God told him to write it down, and he kept a running journal. And he talked about that. All right, we're going to have to stop there. We're going to continue with this on Monday. Proof of Mosaic authorship.